This podcast has been produced on the traditional lands of the Gadigal and Bidjigal peoples. From 2RPH, this is Passing Thoughts, and I'm Rob Caldor. This is the second episode of Passing Thoughts, the podcast where we talk openly and honestly about death, dying, and everything in between. If you missed our first episode with the incredible Teresa Plain, you can find it online wherever you get your podcasts. Later in this episode, I'll bring you our Before We Go segment, where I explore some of the quirkier and more unexpected aspects of death and dying. Today's one is a real corker, so stick around. But this episode is all about our legacy. Jane Mundy speaks with journalist and TV presenter Emma Rossi, who now heads up a truly special initiative, the Sacred Heart Biography Service at St Vincent's Hospital in Sydney. Jane starts by asking Emma how the service works.
So essentially we have a team of about 35 volunteers, although we are recruiting, so we're looking for more. And we are referred people who are at end of life, either in the community that St Vincent's palliative care team are looking after, or that are in the Sacred Heart, which is formerly known as the hospice. And then we match the volunteer to the client. So they're patients of the hospital and the service. When they come to us, they're known as clients. So we match the client and the biographer. And then the biographer lines up a time to meet with the client, and then they usually will spend about 6 hours one-on-one with them, maybe once a week. And then they go home, the biographer goes home, types it up, and everything is in the client's own words. So it's a really beautiful service. There's no extrapolation of, it was a beautiful day when I met with so-and-so or anything like that. It's just the client's own words. And then we do some light editing on that just to make sure it's grammatically correct and makes sense. And then we present the client or their family with 2 printed biographies and a USB in Word so that the family can then update it and maybe add that the client has had a couple more grandchildren, for example. So it's their biography, and all of this is done free of charge to the client.
And how did you become involved with it?
I was training at St Vincent's Hospital in pastoral care, which is a beautiful service where we assist patients with their emotional and spiritual needs. So we try and see everybody that is new to the wards in the public hospital and in the private hospital. And the idea behind that is that often patients can't heal if they're holding on to emotional and spiritual hurts. And so that's a really special thing to do. And then while I was doing my next level of pastoral care, I became aware they were looking for a new biography services manager, or 2 actually, because we job share. And I applied and was thrilled to get the job.
It's such an incredibly valuable thing to do, isn't it, for a person at the end of their life?
It's really interesting, Jane, because it is a win-win-win for everybody involved. So the clinicians, the doctors and nurses, or the physios that are referring clients to us, they see an uptick in their patients' psychosocial life, and they're like, wow, they're really enjoying the process. The client or the patient, often they really enjoy the process because it allows them to reflect on their life and find meaning in the things. And quite often we get a lot of clients that say, oh, look, I'm not very interesting. I haven't done anything too fantastic in my life.
Yeah.
And then when they start reflecting on it, they're like, actually, you know what? As a young woman in the 1950s, I travelled across Africa by myself, and it's like, wow, that was a very brave thing to do.
Yes, and it's sort of validating the life that they've had, isn't it?
Exactly, and we encourage them to look at some photos to spark memories, and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that, or I had my own shop and I ran my own business. And
Do you sometimes find that they remember things that they'd forgotten? Old memories come up that they give their lives kind of value, I suppose.
That's right. That's exactly right. And they're not always just good things. There are often traumas that come up. And so we train our biographers in how to deal with that, and the proper response to trauma may be offering the client some time to take a break, or it may be offering them services like, would you like me to refer you to one of our social workers, for example? Or quite often they might just need a moment, to have a cup of tea or a glass of water, and then they want to keep going. And so it can be incredibly cathartic for a client to tell things that have been on, maybe pushed to their subconscious. And then they quite often will say, do you know what? I feel so much better having told you that story, but it doesn't need to go into the biography.
Yes.
And we are also very cautious of the legacy impact of the biography, because we want the family and friends to have a positive experience when reading through it. So it may be that there's some gentle prodding to the client about, you've spoken a lot about child or daughter 1, but you haven't mentioned 2, 3 and 4. Or we've heard a lot about your work, your career and your hobbies, but your wife of 60 years hasn't got much of a mention. And so there's a real skill in how to work with somebody so that the legacy part of it, i.e. the physical biography or the digital biography, causes no harm and is something that the family can be proud of reading through.
I imagine that a lot depends on a relationship of trust building up between the biographer and the client, so that the client feels able to perhaps express some things that might have been hard to express, or that they'd need a little bit of encouragement to do.
Trust is a huge factor, and we find in most biographies that trust is established very quickly. And people, when they are at end of life, it's very important to them. In fact, according to a study that I was reading from the American Medical Association, it's the number 5 thing in when somebody's at end of life is they want to be listened to. So that is a unique role that the biographer has, is that they are a non-judgmental, listening person. And so that trust is very easy to be established because they love it. And sometimes we find, you might have a 90-year-old who has got dressed up and is wearing their coat and tie for the arrival of the biographer, that the family are excited. I mean, family are encouraged not to interfere in the process, although sometimes you can imagine when a client is losing their memory a little bit, that the family can be quite useful in saying, oh, Mum, do you remember that time when, you went out on that ship and this, adventure happened?
And then it comes back to
and
them.
then it comes back. Yeah. Or they may have a photo there that prompts a memory.
So what kind of questions would a biographer typically ask?
It's really interesting because quite often it's a little bit like a wind-up toy where you stick a recording device in front of the client and they may just go, not pause for breath for an hour or so or until they're exhausted. But we have a series of prompts. It's not an interview like a journalist might interview somebody. It's more of a listening and a gentle prompt. And you may even go a little bit deeper and say, what was that like for you, or how did you feel about it? One of the questions that we don't ask is a question with why in it, WHY, because a why question, and this is something that we were taught through pastoral care training, a why question can sound judgmental. Like, why did you do that? And regardless of the way you put the nice tone that you might use, a friendly tone, it can be interpreted as a why. So we don't use that one, but we might use open-ended questions like, what was that like for you? Or how did you feel when that happened? And then you've got a therapeutic process happening as well as a biography process happening where the client is thinking, oh yeah, that was a particularly exciting time in my life, or I heard a beautiful story the other day where somebody that I am doing a biography on said that their passing out parade as a cadet when they were at school, where there's guns and flags, and it was one of the proudest moments of their life. And so it was a beautiful reflection on that was very meaningful to this person because they felt like they could do anything, that they were invincible. And so that comes back to, as we've been discussing, Jane, about that opportunity to reflect is a really good one. And it's actually, it's not just for people that are at end of life. And this sort of reflection process is a really good thing for people to do at any stage of their life, but particularly perhaps in the last third of their life. And so if you don't have an opportunity to have a biographer, telling your story, it can be a good thing for you to do on your own. And whether you write it down or type it into your computer or somebody to record you, these sorts of things can be a very useful thing to do.
You've touched on a lot of the benefits that clients get from doing this. I think you might have mentioned, or let's talk about whether this actually helps a person at the end of their life. Is there evidence to say that they're in a better emotional state after having done a biography? Does it help in that end-of-life situation? Or at the end of the process, are they in a better state than they were at the beginning?
There's quite a lot of research into what they know as narrative therapy, where people telling their stories and being seen as an individual as opposed to perhaps being defined by their diagnosis. Let's say you've got breast cancer, for example, or lung cancer. Often any interaction with the medical system, you can become known as the person that's got breast or lung cancer. And so what the biography process does is that takes you out of that medical jargon into who you are as an individual. And we do know this from the research, that it's very important for people to be seen as an individual and to be known as to who they are, who they were at the prime of their life, for example. That's absolutely correct. And the University of Notre Dame is looking to do a study in the impact of biography services for exactly this. And one of the things that some research that I've seen recently shows that there is an inverse relationship between your level of spirituality and your fear of death. And when I'm talking about spirituality, I'm not talking at all about formal religions at all. I'm talking about what gives your life meaning and purpose. And it may be going for a walk in the bush, or it may be playing with your grandkids. It may be reading a book with a cup of tea in the sun. Any of those things that you can reflect on and say, that's really important to me in my life. That is a spiritual encounter. And the more that you're able to identify this, and of course biography gives you a chance to do that, essentially the less fear of death and the less existential distress you may have.
And more peace.
You can become incredibly anxious about dying or about where what that process is going to be. And the process of biography, the process of telling your story, assists in reducing that.
The joy and the delight of a client receiving that biography, that document, at the end of it is wonderful. That's the product. But I'm picking up from what you're saying that the process is just as important.
The process is probably almost the most important thing. So our duty of care is to the client, but obviously also towards our volunteers. We make sure our volunteers are always safe. They have to let us know before they go into a client's house and when they come out. Yeah. And that way we're able to make sure that they are safe. Because sometimes, and this has happened quite recently, sometimes there can be a client that may get aggressive, and so essentially the biographer has to remove themselves. We would never send a client into the home of somebody that this is happening, that it's known, so we'd never send them in by themselves. But it can occasionally happen. Sometimes when people have had a brain injury or dementia, you can go through certain stages of aggression. So we're very careful with the duty of care towards our biographers. And so being able to go through that process where you can relieve yourself of a burden, and sometimes in the wards, for example, in Sacred Heart, they may not be there for very long. We know that they may only have a few days or weeks to live. And so the process on the wards might be not a full-blown biography, but just a letter. So we had one recently where a client who was dying said, I'd really like to write a letter to my grandchildren. And so we did that. And it was a beautiful process of, this is what's important to me. And you know, the words at the end were along the lines of, I hope that you're kind people, and I hope that you're service-oriented and look after your parents.
We should all do that, shouldn't we? At whatever stage of life we're at. I've thought of this often, that we should write down to our children and maybe our grandchildren, you know, not quite the great wisdom that we've acquired, but what we want to pass on to them of us.
I'm sure you've heard those recent studies about why do whales and why do human beings, women in particular, live past the age of being able to have children. And one of the things that they know is that it's because we're able to hand down wisdom and be there for the younger generations. And in Wales, for example, to show where the dangerous routes are and where the safe harbours are. Yeah. So in a human sense, that's a beautiful thing to be able to hand on.
Have you ever had a situation where family members have said, we want to make a contribution to this biography, we want to add our little tuppence worth about how important Popsy has been to us or whatever?
We're a little cautious of it because it can slow down the biography process a little bit, especially, for example, if the client dies and then we're waiting on one of the children to provide their reflection and they're grieving, and it's very understandable. You know, the whole process can go on quite long. So our consent, and we do a consent form with the client, is for their story. And that's essentially why we also do the USB, so that they can add to it later on. And they love doing that. But when I wrote with my mother, we did her biography, we asked each of the 35 grandchildren to just do one line, and that was added in, and it's really fantastic. You know, they liked going up and watching TV with her and eating Maltesers, that sort of thing. It was, and she just loved it.
Oh, she would have, I'm sure. That would be so special. Yeah. So if somebody is nearing the end of their life and might be a little apprehensive about doing a biography, what would you say to them to encourage them to do so?
Oh, just that we think that they'll really enjoy the process, and invariably they do. And it's fun, and they'll find that their life has had value and interest, and they have a legacy. But, you know, quite a lot of clients say, no, it's not for me, and that's totally fine. You know, we're not twisting anybody's arms. But I've not heard of any client that just starts the process and then says, I'm really not enjoying this.
I guess you, as the manager, one of your important tasks will be matching the biographer with the client. What are you looking for in a good match?
Well, sometimes it can be that they've both worked in a similar industry, for example, like travel or media, or they've both worked in retail. It may be that they both have the same number of children. It's really interesting because, and it's a bit of a luxury, Jane, to be able to have a choice, because quite often we may even have a waiting list on the biographers, and that's part of the reason why we're doing an expression of interest on our website, because very often we don't have much of a choice. But it's really interesting how quickly that trust issue that you were talking about earlier, they establish a bond very quickly.
The way you described it at the beginning was that the biographer tapes the session, then goes home and transcribes it. But the important thing, I think, is that the voice of the client needs to come through. It needs to be written in the voice of the client so that people who read it can almost hear their loved one talking. Is that really important in the process?
It's really important. And it's really beautiful, because if the client is talking about something, and let's say they've migrated from England, for example, and they've got these fabulous Geordie type of expressions, we keep them in. St Vincent's has a very interesting catchment. We have a lot of very vulnerable clients that may be homeless or drug and alcohol addiction, and we also have the cream of the cream of the eastern suburbs that have a lot of wealth behind them. So all of this sort of cultural thing gets woven into the biography, and it's a really beautiful process actually to have that and the client voice coming through and the jokes that they make.
Yes.
It's as somebody that has that looks at every single bio, it's just such a great, I get a lot of benefit out of doing that too.
Well, I'm sure, some of the family members, some of the stories that the clients tell would be news to them. They'd never heard these stories before.
We hear that all the time, that they're like, I never knew my mother did that, or wow, Dad.
Yes. Did you do that? My dad. Yeah.
Exactly.
So they'd see them in a little bit of a different light than a parent.
Yes, exactly, or their friend, and that's part of the beauty of it, and that's the other win, is that the family are like, oh my gosh, this was really valuable. I'm so pleased to have this legacy document.
Photographs, they'd be important, wouldn't they?
We really love them. My background is a television journalist, so I love a bit of rich media, and the photograph tells 1,000 words, all that sort of thing. So, yes, we encourage that right from the beginning. If they can pull out, maybe 10, a dozen photos of each stage of their life, maybe as a child, and then, at school days, and perhaps something that happened at university or their travels, and then their family. Quite often wedding photos come in, and that's always fantastic. But photographs certainly add a richness to it. And then, there's quite a lot of skill. The biographers have to be able to take a good photo and then be able to crop it and make sure that, there's not reflections all over it and that sort of stuff. They have to be able to insert it into the biography, and then we print it out and bind it in, a lovely thermal binder. And so it's really beautiful. And, of course, because they've got it on digital version too, they can take it and adapt it, or they can get it printed up in hardback if they wanted to, whatever they want.
I have one more question for you. What is one thing you would like to do before you go?
Probably write my own autobiography, actually.
You'd have to say that, wouldn't you? Thanks so much, Emma.
A big thanks to Emma Rossi for joining us on Passing Thoughts. You can find out more about the biography services offered at St Vincent's Hospital, Sydney. Links are in the show notes. You can also listen to Emma's podcast, Inclusive Agenda, available wherever you listen to your podcasts. Kudos to Jane Mundy. You'll hear more of Jane in upcoming episodes. We also want to hear from you. If you've got feedback, topic suggestions, or even want to share your own experiences, we're all ears. Send us an email, passingthoughts@2rph.org.au. You can find us on the 2RPH website or follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn. Before we go, I stumbled upon a fascinating blog by millennial author Alex Hoysted. He's created a program called DeathCalc using artificial intelligence. It runs on his laptop and calculates in real time how long he has to live. So I tracked down Alex and gave him a call.
Hey, Rob.
Hey, Alex, how you doing? What is a death calc? Tell me what the thinking behind that is.
A death calc is short for death calculator, which is exactly as morbid as it sounds. Essentially, it's a countdown to my death. Now, obviously, I don't know when I'm going to die, but I just put in, assuming that I live to the average age of a male human of 84. It tells me how much longer I've got to live. And it's just a little timer that sits in the upper right-hand corner of my computer screen. It runs automatically. And yes, I'm a millennial, so I'm plugged into the digital economy. The idea actually came from a much older guy called Kevin Kelly, who's a popular technology commentator, who has a countdown on his computer. And yeah, I made it myself.
You wake up in the morning and you have a cup of tea and you log on to work and you see that. What's your reaction?
I'm a little bit of a stoic in that I think that contemplating the finitude of existence is actually part of a well-rounded life, I think. If you have in mind how short and fleeting your life is, it can actually be very motivating. And like everyone else in the digital economy, when you turn on your computer to do some work, there's lots of different distractions. It's very easy to go and do something else. So in order to focus what it is that I want to do, the things that I want to achieve, having a really visceral reminder that that I'm dying constantly is very powerful.
Alex, you mentioned Stoic. Tell me more about the Stoic philosophy that you know.
Stoicism is kind of having a day in the sun. A lot of people find it very useful. I came across Stoicism during COVID-19, actually, when the world felt like it was going to shit. And there were a group of Roman thinkers, so some really prominent ones, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, who, among other things, counseled that you should consider death constantly, meditate on death as a way to feel more alive in the present. A lot of our foibles, the things that we mess up in our lives, are because we deny the reality of death. I find it very useful, and they're absolutely right. I think that facing the truth of our existence as very finite beings who are going to die, we came from nothing, we'll return to nothing, actually calms me down a lot. It's been a really important part of my spiritual growth, for sure.
You described it earlier as, could be viewed as a tad morbid. Is that problematic for you?
No, I don't think so. I think that we live in a society that goes to rather great lengths to cover up death. I mean, if you think about it, the entire funeral industry is kind of built around hiding death as much as possible. In the olden days, people would sit next to the corpses of their relatives for a long time. Like, there was no one who came away and kind of whisked the bodies away. We had a much closer relationship with death. The money that we accumulate, really, if you think about it, is a way of trying to outlast our physical existences. We're trying to build something up that lasts beyond us. We call it a legacy. And so I think a lot about this. I think a lot about how we try and keep legacies that ultimately are gonna go to zero at some point.
Have you had any bizarre reactions to it other than punters like me calling you up for a podcast?
I think it's mostly just a bit of an unorthodox move. I think a lot of people will rely on inspiring quotes, maybe listen to a motivational speaker, or maybe there's something else that gets them out of bed. To have death as a constant reminder to push you to do things in your life, yeah, definitely strikes a few people as a bit bananas.
Now, it's only for you, isn't it? Yeah, it's not published in the world, the death calculator. So it's very personalised. Do you recommend other people doing the same thing? Does it work?
Yeah, it definitely does. So I'll just nerd out a little bit on this. I vibe coded it using ChatGPT. So just ask ChatGPT to make me an executable application. This is what I want it to do. This is what I want the timer to be. But I've kind of customized it to work for me. So there's no reason that you need to go out. I'm more than happy to share the code, and I did on my blog. But for example, I've got a reflections button on the application. I click it, and then it will automatically ask me a reflection about my writing or what I want to achieve, which it then saves to a growing text file. And so that text file is kind of like a living document of how I'm feeling day to day when I sit down to do my work. And it ties it all up very neatly. I'm not sure what I'll do with that growing document just yet, but my advice would be use your imagination. What is it that kind of gets you going if you're working on a computer? And yeah, we're very lucky to live in a world where we can ask an artificial intelligence tool to just make these little programs for us that can potentially help us out.
Personally, I think there's something powerful in what Alex has built, not just as a motivational tool, but as a reminder to appreciate the time we have. Our lives are finite, and tools like DeathCalc can make us more conscious of that fact. I've included a link to Alex Hoysted's blog in the show notes if you'd like to explore it further. He's currently working on a book, and I can't wait to see what he comes up with. Who knows, I might even create my own DeathCalc one day. In our next episode, Connie Mason speaks with Prof. Ken Hillman about how best to navigate the medical system when dealing with dying.
If you're a doctor focused on curing, making people better, then it's very difficult to bring up the topic of death and dying.
This episode of Passing Thoughts was made with the support from the Wicking Trust and the team from 2RPH. I'm Rob Caldor, and thanks for listening to Passing Thoughts.
This is a Radio 2RPH production.